Destitute woman accepts job of caring for paraplegic millionaire. The heartbreaking twist will leave you in tears. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. Hello, dearest souls. Let's begin now. I've been working tirelessly, 16 hours a day, to create content for you. But for the past 3 days, I haven't seen the response I hoped for, and it's disheartening. If this continues, I might stop working on this channel. I need your support to keep going. Please, like this video, share it with others. Comment "done" below your love and engagement. Keep this channel alive. Let's grow together. Thank you. The pristine white envelope from Cedar Grove Children's Services lay unopened on Emberlyn Thorne's weathered kitchen table, its official seal gleaming under the flickering fluorescent light. At 22, she should have been graduating college, but life had carved a different path through the wreckage of tragedy. Her trembling fingers traced the edges of the last family photograph she possessed, a snapshot of joy, frozen in time before destiny's cruel intervention. In the photograph, 4-year-old Emberlyn beamed at the camera, her autumn-red curls catching the summer sunshine, while her mother, Adelaide, cradled 2-year-old Asher against her flowing sundress. Their father, Marcus, stood tall and proud, his kind eyes twinkling with the promise of forever. None of them knew that forever would end on a rain-slicked highway just 3 weeks later, when a semi-truck's brakes would fail on the mountain pass, taking with it not just their parents, but the scaffolding of a normal life. "I promised, Mama," Emberlyn whispered to the empty apartment, her voice catching on the words like fabric on thorns. "I promised I'd keep him safe." The social workers had wanted to separate them, Emberlyn to the Hendersons in Springfield, Asher to a young couple in Portland. But even at 4, she had shown the steel in her spine that would define her life. She'd screamed, clutched her baby brother, and refused to let go until their grandmother Eleanor stepped forward to claim them both. Grandmother Eleanor's arthritis-gnarled hands had done their best, but by the time Emberlyn turned 12, those same hands could barely grip a teacup. The roles reversed. Young Emberlyn learned to cook, clean and care for both her ailing grandmother and growing brother. She mastered the art of stretching Eleanor's social security checks, learned to mend clothes instead of buying new ones, and discovered that hunger could be fooled by drinking extra water before bed. School became a luxury she couldn't afford. Between shifts at Molly's Diner and nights cleaning offices, Emberlyn completed her high school diploma through correspondence courses, studying under streetlights during her dinner breaks. Her teachers had mourned the loss of her potential. The bright girl, who had once dreamed of becoming a doctor, now calculated tips instead of medical dosages. But Asher, her beautiful, brilliant Asher, he would have everything. She poured every spare penny into his education, tutors when he struggled with mathematics, soccer cleats when he showed athletic promise, even a second-hand laptop for his college applications. While her own dreams withered like unwatered flowers, she nurtured his with the fierce dedication of a gardener tending the last seedling in a drought. Now, at 30, the bitter fruit of her sacrifice lay in that pristine white envelope. Inside was the proof that Asher, her beloved brother, had dropped out of college 6 months ago. The tuition money she'd scraped together by working double shifts, money that still carried the greasy scent of diner fries, had instead funded his secret life with Ruby Chen, the pharmaceutical rep's daughter, who wore designer labels and sneered at Emberlyn's shabby apartment. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows like accusations. On her phone, Asher's last text message glowed with casual cruelty. "Ruby and I need space to start our lives. Stop trying to control me with your guilt trips about all you've sacrificed. I never asked you to give up your life for mine." Emberlyn's fingers brushed the tender bruise on her cheek, a parting gift from their last confrontation. Ruby had stood in the doorway, manicured hand resting possessively on Asher's arm as he'd packed his things. When Ember Lynn had tried to show him their parents' photograph to remind him of the family they'd once been, he'd shoved her away. The wall had caught her full, but nothing could cushion the impact of his words. "They're dead, Lynn. Stop living in the past. I'm not your replacement family." The apartment felt cavernous now, though it was barely large enough for a bed and dresser. Every corner held echoes: Asher's first steps across the worn carpet, his childhood drawings still taped to the refrigerator, the height marks on the doorframe tracking his growth while she remained stagnant, rooted in place by duty and love. A siren wailed in the distance, and Ember Lynn startled, remembering another siren on another rainy night. The phone call from the hospital social worker replayed in her mind. "There's been an accident. Your parents. I'm so sorry." The same rain had fallen then, as if the sky itself mourned with her. Standing slowly, she moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Beyond the streaked pane, city lights blurred into watercolor smears. Somewhere out there, Asher was starting his new life, unburdened by the weight of their shared past. And here she stood, 30 years old, with nothing to show for her decades of sacrifice except calloused hands and an empty apartment. The classified section of the newspaper lay open on her desk, red circles around potential jobs. Her savings, meant for Asher's final semester, would cover 2 months' rent at most. Pride had kept her from public assistance before, but pride wouldn't keep her warm or fed. A fresh wave of tears threatened, but Ember Lynn squared her shoulders, remembering her mother's favorite saying, "Steel isn't strong because it never breaks. It's strong because it always reforms." She had been steel for Asher. Now it was time to be steel for herself. Her gaze fell on a small advertisement she'd initially overlooked. Live-in caregiver needed. Experience with mobility assistance preferred. Generous compensation. Blackwood Manor. The word live-in caught her attention, a solution to both her housing and employment problems. Picking up her phone, Ember Lynn dialed the number with trembling fingers. As it rang, she took one last look at the family photograph, at the smiling faces of her parents, at the toddler who had become a stranger. Then, with gentle reverence, she placed the photo face down on the table. A crisp voice answered, "Blackwood Residence." Ember Lynn took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried the strength of someone who had been bending without breaking for 25 years. "Yes, I'm calling about the caregiver position." The rain continued to fall, but for the first time in months, its rhythm sounded less like an ending and more like the tentative beginning of something new. Chapter 2. The manor on Maple Hill morning mist clung to the wrought-iron gates of Blackwood Manor like gossamer veils, transforming the estate into something from a forgotten fairy tale. Ember Lynn stood before them, her second-hand blazer buttoned against the autumn chill, clutching a worn leather portfolio containing her meager credentials: a certified nursing assistant license earned through night classes, letters of recommendation from grateful elderly neighbors she'd helped care for, and a lifetime of experience putting others' needs before her own. The intercom crackled to life, startling a pair of mourning doves from their perch on the gate. "Please state your name and purpose," came a clipped British accent. "Ember Lynn Thorne for the caregiver position. I have an appointment with Mrs. Henderson at 9. Her voice sounded smaller than she'd intended, lost in the vastness of the estate's grounds. The gates swung open with a whisper of well-oiled hinges, revealing a winding driveway bordered by ancient maple trees. Their leaves blazed copper and gold in the morning light, carpeting the pristine gravel path with nature's own welcome mat. Each step up the drive felt like crossing a threshold between worlds, from her life of fluorescent-lit diners and midnight cleaning shifts to something altogether more dignified, more graceful. Blackwood Manor emerged from the mist like a ship coming to harbour. The Victorian mansion wore its age with aristocratic pride. Red brick walls draped with mature ivy, tall windows gleaming like knowing eyes, white trimwork as crisp as fresh linen. A wheelchair ramp, recently installed but expertly designed to complement the historic architecture, curved gently alongside the grand front steps. The heavy oak door opened before she could reach for the brass knocker. Mrs. Henderson, the house manager, stood in the doorway. A stern woman in her 60s, with steel-grey hair, pulled into an immaculate chignon. Her appraising gaze took in Ember Lynn's carefully pressed blazer, noting the slight wear at the cuffs. "Punctual. Good. Follow me, please." Mrs. Henderson's heels clicked against marble floors as she led Ember Lynn through the foyer, where a crystal chandelier cast rainbow prisms across walls adorned with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. "Mr. Blackwood's condition requires absolute dedication," Mrs. Henderson explained as they walked. "The position is live-in, as advertised. Your private suite connects to his chambers through a monitoring station. The previous 5 caregivers lasted an average of 2 weeks each. Mr. Blackwood can be demanding." They paused before double doors of rich mahogany. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "He wasn't always like this, before the illness." She straightened her shoulders. "Well, are you prepared to meet him?" Ember Lynn nodded, squaring her shoulders. The doors opened onto a study that seemed to occupy its own universe. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked carefully manicured gardens, now touched by autumn's paintbrush. Bookshelves lined every available wall, their leather-bound contents speaking of a mind that hungered for knowledge. A grand piano stood in one corner, dust gathering on its closed lid, and there, framed by morning light, sat Harrison Blackwood in his wheelchair. The newspaper articles Ember Lynn had researched hadn't done him justice. At 45, he retained the handsome features that had once graced magazine covers celebrating America's youngest tech billionaires. But illness had carved new lines around his mouth, shadows beneath his cheekbones. His dark hair was struck through with silver at the temples, and his hands, once famous for their pioneering work in biomedical engineering, lay motionless in his lap. "Another one, Mrs. Henderson?" His voice carried the cultured tones of old money and excellent education, edged with something sharper. "How long do you estimate this one will last? Shall we start a betting pool?" "Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Henderson's tone held warning. "Miss Thorne comes highly recommended." "They all do." His steel-grey eyes met Ember Lynn's, challenging. "Tell me, Miss Thorne, what makes you different from the parade of qualified professionals who couldn't handle the job?" Ember Lynn felt the familiar steel in her spine, the same steel that had helped her raise a brother, care for a grandmother, survive abandonment. "With respect, Mr. Blackwood, I'm not here to handle a job. I'm here to help a person." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of the quiet strength in her voice. "My resume won't impress you," she continued, holding his gaze. "I haven't worked in prestigious hospitals or earned advanced degrees, but I've spent my life caring for people who needed me, and I've never walked away, no matter how difficult things became." The study fell silent save for the ticking of a grandfather clock. Harrison's eyes narrowed, studying her with the intensity that had once revolutionized medical technology. On the wall behind him, a series of framed patents testified to the brilliant mind now trapped in an unresponsive body. "Mrs. Henderson," he said finally, "show Miss Thorne to her quarters." His mouth curved in what might have been a smile or a grimace. Let's see if she meant what she said about not walking away. As Mrs. Henderson led her back through the manor's winding corridors, Ember Lynn caught glimpses of the life Harrison had lived before illness struck. Photos showed him shaking hands with world leaders, receiving awards, standing proudly beside a beautiful woman in designer clothes, his ex-wife Vanessa, according to Ember Lynn's research. In each progressive image, the woman's smile grew more strained until, in the most recent photos, she vanished altogether. The suite designated for Emberlyn's use was larger than her entire apartment. A bay window overlooked the maple-lined drive, and the furniture spoke of quiet luxury. But it was the small nursing station, equipped with monitors and emergency medical equipment, that drew her attention. This would be her command center, her battle station in the fight to help Harrison Blackwood reclaim his life. The last caregiver left these. Mrs. Henderson placed a stack of medical charts on the desk. Mr. Blackwood's condition is rare but not untreatable. The doctors believe he could regain significant mobility with proper care and dedication. She paused at the door. The salary, as discussed, will be deposited weekly. Mr. Blackwood's schedule is in the top drawer. He takes breakfast at 7 sharp. Left alone, Emberlyn moved to the window. Below, the maple trees she'd admired on her arrival swayed gently in the autumn breeze, their leaves beginning their graceful descent. Like those leaves, she had been carried here by winds of change, of necessity. But unlike them, she would not simply drift through. She had made a promise, not just to Harrison Blackwood or to herself, but to the universe that had led her to this moment. She unpacked her small suitcase, hanging her modest wardrobe in the spacious closet. The last item she removed was the face-down family photograph from her apartment. After a moment's hesitation, she placed it on the bedside table, but this time left it facing up. Her parents smiled at her from behind the glass, their frozen happiness a reminder of why she understood better than most how quickly life could change, and how important it was to have someone who would stay through the storm. The grandfather clock in the study chimed 4 times. Soon, Harrison would need his afternoon medications and physical therapy. Emberlyn straightened her blazer, checked her reflection in the ornate mirror, and took a deep breath. It was time to begin. Chapter 3. Broken Wings. The study where Harrison spent most of his days was a museum of a life interrupted. Emberlyn noticed this during her first morning routine with him, as autumn sunlight filtered through the vast windows, illuminating the layers of his past like geological strata. Awards gathered dust on mahogany shelves. The Peterson Prize for Innovation, the Global Health Pioneer Medal, the Presidential Medal of Technology. Each accolade marked a milestone in a journey that had once seemed unstoppable. The medications first, I presume? Harrison's voice carried the weight of someone who had repeated this routine countless times, each repetition a reminder of his dependence. You'll find them categorized in the cabinet. My previous caregiver was rather methodical. Emberlyn moved with quiet efficiency, noting how his eyes followed her movements. The cabinet revealed 7 different medications, each with its own complex schedule. She recognized most from her CNA training: treatments for nerve regeneration, muscle maintenance, pain management. The bottles stood like silent soldiers fighting a war within his body that had no guaranteed victory. You organize them differently, he observed as she arranged the morning doses. Left to right instead of by size. Interesting. It mirrors the order of absorption rates, she explained, measuring each pill with careful precision. The first ones need time to work before the others can be most effective. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Most caregivers don't bother learning the pharmacology. I believe in understanding why I'm doing something, not just how. She helped him with the water glass, her movements natural and unremarked upon, preserving his dignity in the simple act of drinking. The wall behind his wheelchair told stories he hadn't volunteered. Newspaper clippings chronicled his rise. Blackwood Tech revolutionizes prosthetic design. Youngest CEO to break $1 billion in medical innovation. Harrison Blackwood's neural interface could change lives. The articles grew newer, their headlines darker. Blackwood Tech stocks plummet amid CEOs' health concerns. Innovation giant faces uncertain future. Power couple splits. Vanessa Blackwood files for divorce. Harrison noticed her reading. Vanessa had them framed. She believed in preserving history, both triumphs and tragedies. His laugh held no humor, though she didn't stay to witness the latter firsthand. Emberlyn remained quiet, allowing him space to continue if he chose. She began her daily check of his vital signs, her touch professional but gentle. "It began with dropping things," he said finally, staring out at the maple trees that blazed like fire in the morning light. "Keys, pens, coffee cups. The board thought it was stress. 60-hour work weeks catching up with me. Even I believed that at first." His pulse beneath her fingers was strong and steady, betraying no hint of the turmoil in his voice. The diagnosis came on a Thursday: Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare autoimmune disorder where the body attacks its own nerve cells. Progressive paralysis from the extremities inward. They said I was lucky. We caught it early. Lucky. The word twisted like a knife. "Do you know what Vanessa said when the neurologist left the room?" Emberlyn shook her head, recording his blood pressure with careful precision. "She said we should call the PR team, not 'we'll fight this' or 'I'm here for you.'" Her first thought was damage control for the company. His fingers twitched slightly, a good sign, though he seemed unaware of the movement. "Within a month, I couldn't hold a stylus. The man who revolutionized touchscreen technology couldn't touch a screen. The irony wasn't lost on the shareholders." He fell silent as Emberlyn began his morning range of motion exercises, her touch firm but careful on each joint. The photography on his desk caught her eye. A younger Harrison in a tuxedo, accepting an award. Vanessa stood beside him in a red gown that probably cost more than Emberlyn's yearly salary, her smile practiced and perfect. The frame was turned slightly away, as if even the photograph couldn't bear to watch what had become of its subject. "The divorce papers arrived with my first wheelchair," Harrison continued, his voice distant. "She had them couriered to the hospital. 18 years of marriage delivered by a man in a company polo shirt who asked for a signature I could barely provide." Emberlyn moved to his shoulders, working to prevent the muscle atrophy that could make recovery even harder. Through her hands, she could feel the tension his words didn't reveal. "Our son James was 16. Vanessa enrolled him in a boarding school in Switzerland the same week. To spare him the trauma," she said. "As if watching your father fight to recover is more traumatic than abandonment." A framed drawing hung in the corner, childish strokes forming what might have been a father and son standing before a house. The paper had yellowed with age, but the love in those crayon lines remained vibrant. "The company board voted me out 3 months later. Temporary medical leave, they called it. 20 years of innovation, of pushing boundaries, of changing lives, all set aside because they couldn't bear to watch their visionary leader learn to hold a spoon again." Emberlyn completed the exercises in respectful silence, but when she spoke, her voice held no pity, only understanding. "My parents died when I was 4. My brother was 2. Everyone told me we'd be better off separated in different foster homes, that it was too much responsibility for a child to bear." She adjusted his chair slightly, ensuring his comfort. "Sometimes the people who should stay are the first to leave, and the strength to continue comes from places we never expected." Harrison's eyes met hers in the reflection of the window, something shifting in their steel-grey depths. "And did you continue?" "I raised my brother, worked every job I could find, got him through school." She didn't mention Asher's betrayal. This moment wasn't about her pain. "We continue because the alternative isn't acceptable, and sometimes continuing means accepting help from others." The silence that followed felt different from before, less a wall and more a bridge. "The physical therapist will be here at 11, Emberlyn said finally, gathering the medical supplies with efficient movements. "Would you like to have breakfast in the solarium? The morning light is particularly good for vitamin D absorption, which can help with nerve regeneration." Harrison's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but perhaps its distant cousin. "You really did study the pharmacology, didn't you?" "I believe in understanding what I'm fighting for." She moved behind his wheelchair, her steps sure and purposeful. "Shall we begin?" As she guided him through the manor's halls, Emberlyn noticed small changes needed to make his environment more navigable. Slight adjustments to furniture placement, modifications to door handles, reorganization of frequently used items. Her mind was already cataloguing, planning, adapting. Behind them, the study with its wall of memories stood quiet, its stories told, but not finished. The morning sun streamed through the solarium's glass walls, turning the wheelchair's chrome to gold. Outside, a maple leaf detached from its branch and began its graceful descent, dancing on autumn winds. Like that leaf, Harrison Blackwood's fall from heights had been beyond his control. But unlike the leaf, his story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. Chapter 4. Dawn's First Light. October painted the manor grounds in watercolor hues of amber and crimson as autumn settled into its full glory. Emberlyn's first month as Harrison's caregiver had fallen into a rhythm as natural as the changing seasons, each day building upon the last with small victories and quiet revelations. Dawn found her preparing for their morning routine, arranging fresh towels and laying out Harrison's medications while the manor slumbered. The early hours held a different quality here, not the harsh fluorescent glare of her diner shifts, but a gentle awakening, like watercolors bleeding across wet paper. "You're humming again," Harrison's voice carried from his bedroom as she entered precisely at 7. "Mozart's Piano Concerto number 23, if I'm not mistaken." Emberlyn felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I didn't realize I was. I'm sorry if it disturbs you." "On the contrary." Something in his voice had softened over the past weeks. "It's pleasant. Different from the clinical silence I'd grown accustomed to, though I suspect Mozart would be mortified by my current inability to play his work." The baby grand piano in his study caught the morning light, its polished surface reflecting the sunrise like liquid gold. Emberlyn had noticed how his gaze often lingered on it during their therapy sessions. "The paralysis hasn't affected your musical knowledge," she observed, helping him sit up with practiced ease. Their morning routine had become a dance of sorts, each movement coordinated and respectful. The mind that appreciates Mozart is still very much intact. The mind remembers what the hands cannot perform. His bitter tone didn't match the way he relaxed into her support, like remembering how to swim while drowning. Emberlyn maintained her gentle efficiency as she helped him prepare for the day, but her words carried their own quiet strength. Sometimes remembering is the first step to reclaiming. She demonstrated a new finger exercise the physical therapist had recommended. "The neural pathways exist, we just need to rebuild the bridges." Their mornings had developed their own intimate choreography, not the intimacy of romance, but of human care and dignity. Emberlyn had learned to read the microscopic changes in his expression that indicated pain or discomfort. Harrison, in turn, had stopped trying to hide these indicators from her, accepting her help not as defeat, but as collaboration. "Tell me about the diner," he said suddenly, as she wheeled him toward the solarium for breakfast. This too had become part of their routine, his questions about her past, asked in these moments of transition. "You mentioned working there during high school." "Molly's Diner on 12th Street, she confirmed, positioning his wheelchair at the table she'd already set. Morning light streamed through the glass walls, turning the sterling silver utensils into instruments of fire. I started as a dishwasher at 14. Molly let me do homework during slow periods. Harrison watched as she arranged his breakfast with careful attention to his preferences. She'd noted them all, from the precise temperature of his coffee to the way he preferred his toast cut. "And your brother? Did he work as well?" I wanted him to focus on school. Emberlin's movements remained steady, though something flickered in her eyes. "He was brilliant at mathematics. I thought—" She paused, adjusting the napkin with unnecessary precision. "Well, we don't always get to choose how our investments mature." Harrison's hand twitched, one of the small movements that had been returning gradually. Emberlin noticed but didn't comment, knowing he preferred to acknowledge his progress in his own time. "Some investments," he said carefully, "are more about the intent behind them than the return." Their eyes met briefly over the coffee cup she helped him lift. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of parallel disappointments, of expectations shattered like fine china on marble floors. As October deepened, their days fell into patterns that felt less like medical routine and more like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Emberlin learned that Harrison preferred to read scientific journals in the afternoons, his mind still sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. She would position his tablet at the perfect angle, and sometimes he would ask her opinion on the articles, not as a caregiver, but as someone whose perspective he had come to value. "What do you think about their approach to neural regeneration?" he asked one particularly golden afternoon, the maple trees outside his study window blazing like secular stained glass. "The methodology seems flawed," she finished, adjusting his position to prevent pressure points. "They're not accounting for the body's natural inflammatory response. It's like trying to rebuild a house while it's still on fire." His eyebrow arched slightly. "You've been studying the research." "I read the journals after you finished them." She met his gaze steadily. "Understanding the enemy helps win the war." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And here I thought I was being subtle about leaving them open on the tablet." These moments accumulated like autumn leaves, small, bright instances of connection that began to carpet the cold marble of their professional relationship. Emberlin noticed how Harrison had stopped turning away during his therapy exercises, how he had begun sharing small observations about his condition without prompting. She catalogued these changes as carefully as she monitored his physical progress, knowing that healing happened in layers, like sedimentary rock forming over eons. The transformation extended beyond their daily interactions. Mrs. Henderson remarked one morning how the manor itself seemed to be waking from a long winter. He asked about the garden plans for spring, she confided to Emberlin while reviewing the week's schedule. "He hasn't shown interest in the grounds since before." The housekeeper didn't need to finish. They both understood the before and after that divided Harrison's life like a surgical incision. Even the staff moved differently now, no longer tiptoeing around their employer's study as if it contained a sleeping dragon. Harrison had begun asking the cook about her family, inquiring after the gardener's new grandson. These were small changes, like first shoots breaking through frost-hardened soil, but Emberlin recognized them for what they were, signs of thaw in a winter that had threatened to be eternal. One evening, as she was completing her final checks before retiring, Harrison's voice stopped her at the study door. "The Mozart this morning," he said, not turning from the window, where he watched night settle over the grounds. "It was the Andante movement, wasn't it?" "Yes," she answered, surprised he'd remembered her unconscious humming from hours before. "It's about hope," he said quietly. "That movement, the way it builds from darkness to light, like dawn breaking over water." His fingers twitched again, and this time she saw him notice, saw him test the movement, deliberately. "I hadn't thought about that in a long time." Emberlyn adjusted his blanket one final time, her touch professional but gentle. "Tomorrow we'll try the new exercises. Your nerve conduction test showed improvement. You'll hum while we work." The question held a vulnerability that didn't match his usual precision. "If you like," she promised, moving toward the door. "Sleep well, Mr. Blackwood." "Harrison," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. "When it's just us, you can call me Harrison." She paused in the doorway, the weight of this small intimacy settling between them like evening dew. "Good night, Harrison," she said softly, and closed the door on the possibility of anything more. But that night, as she reviewed his medical charts in her private suite, Emberlyn found herself humming Mozart's Andante, her fingers moving in unconscious accompaniment. Outside her window, the maple leaves continued their autumn dance, and somewhere in the distance, dawn waited to break over water. Chapter 5. Unexpected Blooms. November arrived at Blackwood Manor with the first frost, painting delicate crystalline patterns across the greenhouse windows, where Emberlyn had begun taking Harrison for his morning exercises. The space offered a pocket of perpetual spring, filled with orchids and rare tropical plants that seemed to defy the approaching winter. "You've rearranged the breakfast tray again," Harrison observed one particularly crisp morning, his voice carrying a note of curiosity rather than criticism. The greenhouse's humidity had brought a slight flush to his usually pale cheeks. Emberlyn adjusted the orchid mister, creating a fine vapor that caught the morning light like suspended diamonds. "I noticed you always eat the toast first, then the fruit. It seemed more efficient to arrange things in order of preference. The crusts are cut off." His voice held an odd note. "Yes." She turned from the orchids to face him, uncertain about his reaction. "I noticed you always leave them. Is that not—" "My mother," Harrison interrupted, his eyes fixed on the perfectly trimmed toast triangles. "She always— before she died." He fell silent, but his right hand twitched, a stronger movement than usual, almost reaching toward the plate before falling still. Emberlyn moved closer, medical training warring with the instinct to comfort. "Harrison? She died when I was 12. Cancer." His words emerged like reluctant confessions. "She would cut the crusts off my toast every morning, even when the chemotherapy left her too weak to hold the knife properly. I remember watching her hands shake." He drew a shaky breath. "After she died, my father sent me to boarding school. The dining hall served perfectly square toast with precise corners. I couldn't eat it for months." Understanding bloomed in Emberlyn's chest like the orchids surrounding them. She'd learned to read Harrison's silences over the past weeks. The different qualities of quiet that meant pain, frustration, or memories too sharp to touch. This silence was different. It held the fragile vulnerability of a door, long locked, finally creaking open. "My mother used to sing while she cooked," she offered quietly, adjusting his wheelchair so he could better see the gardens beyond the greenhouse glass. Nothing fancy, usually old country songs or hymns she remembered from childhood. After the accident, I'd sometimes catch myself humming those same songs while making dinner for Asher, even though I could barely remember her face. Harrison's fingers twitched again, and this time Emberlyn was certain it was intentional. "The physical therapist says the nerve conduction tests show improvement," he said, changing the subject but not the intimacy of the moment. "You've been reviewing the results." Every evening, she began their morning exercises, supporting his arm as they worked through the range of motion sequence. "The regeneration pattern is promising, especially in your right hand. The myelin sheaths are showing signs of—" She caught herself. "I'm sorry. I'm sure you know the medical details better than I do." "No, continue." Something had shifted in his expression. "I'd like to hear your analysis." So she talked while they worked, explaining her observations about his progress. The patterns she'd noticed in his muscle responses, the research she'd been studying in her free time. Harrison listened with an intensity she'd seen in old videos of him at medical technology conferences, his mind clearly engaging with each point she raised. "You understand more than you let on," he said finally, as she helped him with his water glass. "Why hide it?" Emberlyn carefully considered her response. "People often dismiss caregivers as just pairs of hands. Sometimes it's easier to let them think that while quietly doing what needs to be done. Like raising a brother alone, or managing a household at 12? His insight startled her. "You're used to being underestimated, aren't you?" Before she could respond, a sharp crack split the morning quiet. One of the orchid pots had slipped from its shelf, shattering on the greenhouse floor. Emberlyn moved instinctively to clean it up, but Harrison's voice stopped her. "Wait." His right hand moved deliberately, fingers extending with visible effort. "Look." From the broken pot, a single white flower had survived intact, its delicate petals unmarred by the fall. As they watched, a shaft of morning sun broke through the November clouds, setting the bloom aglow. "Life finds a way," Harrison murmured, almost to himself. Then, with careful precision, his fingers closed around the water glass. It was a small movement, hardly noticeable to anyone who hadn't spent weeks watching for exactly this progress. But to Emberlyn, it felt like witnessing a sunrise. "Harrison," she breathed, professional distance momentarily forgotten in her excitement. "I felt it yesterday," he admitted quietly, "during the Mozart. My fingers wanted to move with the music, like muscle memory awakening from a long sleep. I wasn't sure if it was real or wishful thinking until now." Emberlyn fought the urge to take his hand, to share in this triumph through touch. Instead, she channeled her joy into action, pulling out her tablet to document this breakthrough. "We should adjust your exercise routine to focus on finger dexterity, maybe incorporate some occupational therapy techniques." "Emberlyn." His voice stopped her planning. "Thank you." She looked up from the tablet, caught by the intensity in his grey eyes. "I'm just doing my job." "No," he said softly. "You're seeing me. The person, not the diagnosis. Do you know how rare that is?" The moment stretched between them like spun glass, beautiful and dangerous. Emberlyn broke it gently, returning to her professional role like slipping on a familiar coat. "We should continue with your exercises while your muscles are warm." But as they worked through the routine, something had undeniably shifted. Harrison shared more memories of his mother, her love of gardening, the way she'd encouraged his early interest in science, how she'd played Mozart during Sunday brunches. In return, Emberlyn spoke of her own mother's small kindnesses, the fragments of memory she'd held onto like precious stones. The broken orchid pot remained on the greenhouse floor, its surviving bloom a testament to resilience. Later, when Harrison had returned to his study for afternoon readings, Emberlyn carefully transferred the flower to a new pot. She placed it on the windowsill where Harrison could see it, a small reminder that beauty could survive the fall. That evening, as she completed her final checks, she heard soft music coming from Harrison's study. The piano recording was playing Mozart's Andante, and through the barely open door she saw his right hand moving slightly, conducting an orchestra only he could see. She didn't enter, didn't break the spell of this private moment. But as she walked to her own quarters, she found herself humming along her mother's hymns, mixing with Mozart in a melody of remembered love and unexpected hope. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, each flake carrying the promise of transformation. Inside the greenhouse, the rescued orchid turned its face toward the warmth, its white petals glowing like stars in the gathering dark. And somewhere between duty and devotion, Between professional distance and profound understanding, something new was beginning to bloom. Chapter 6. Healing Hands. December arrived at Blackwood Manor wrapped in silver frost and whispered promises. The month brought with it not just holiday decorations that Mrs. Henderson insisted upon, tradition, Mr. Blackwood, even if you're determined to be a Grinch, but also increasingly noticeable improvements in Harrison's condition. His right hand now consistently responded to basic commands, and sensation was returning to his fingertips in waves that left him alternately elated and frustrated by their inconsistency. "Again," Harrison insisted one evening, his voice tight with determination. The study had become their sanctuary for additional therapy sessions after dinner, when the rest of the household settled into quiet routine. "I almost had it that time." Emberlyn watched as he focused on the small rubber ball they'd been using for grip exercises. His fingers trembled with effort, slowly curling inward. The ball rolled slightly, then fell, bouncing across the antique Persian carpet with a soft thump. "Damn it!" The curse escaped through clenched teeth. "It was better this morning." "Progress isn't linear," Emberlyn reminded him gently, retrieving the ball. "Your nerves are like sleeping limbs awakening. Sometimes the pins and needles are worse before sensation returns fully." She placed the ball back in his palm, her fingers brushing his skin momentarily. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through them both, his renewed sensitivity to touch making every casual contact more significant. "Tell me something," Harrison said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the ball as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Something real, not medical reports or progress notes." Emberlyn settled into the chair across from his wheelchair, considering. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, coating the manor grounds in pristine white. "I used to dream of being a doctor," she said finally. "Before my parents' accident, I would steal my father's medical journals and pretend I could understand the long words. He was a resident at County General, working toward neurosurgery." Harrison's fingers flexed unconsciously, the ball rolling slightly but staying in his palm. What happened to that dream? Life happened. Dreams don't put food on the table or pay for a brother's school supplies. She smiled, but it held a touch of old pain. Sometimes we have to set aside what we want for what others need. Like Vanessa did. His bitter tone caught her off guard. Setting aside her marriage vows for her social calendar? "No." Emberlyn's voice was firm. "That's different. Marriage is a promise to share both struggles and triumphs. Walking away when things get difficult isn't sacrifice, it's surrender." The ball dropped again, but this time Harrison didn't curse. Instead, he studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You've never surrendered, have you? Even when your brother—" "Some things are worth fighting for," she said quietly, "even when the fight seems impossible. Like a paraplegic millionaire's recovery." A hint of his old sardonic humor colored his words. "Like any human being's dignity and potential." She met his gaze steadily. "Your bank account has nothing to do with your worth as a person, Harrison." The use of his first name, still rare enough to carry weight, hung in the air between them. In the fireplace, a log shifted, sending sparks dancing upward like earthbound stars. "I want to try something," Harrison said after a moment. "The piano. Would you help me?" The request startled her. The baby grand had stood silent since her arrival, its polished surface reflecting their therapy sessions like a black mirror of possibility. "Are you sure?" His jaw set in familiar determination. "Number. But I want to try anyway." The journey from wheelchair to piano bench was complicated, requiring all of Emberlyn's training and Harrison's stubborn will. When he finally sat before the keys, his breathing was slightly labored, but his eyes shone with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "Mozart," he said softly. "The Andante you're always humming. I played it at my first recital when I was 10. My mother cried. Emberlyn positioned herself beside him on the bench, close enough to support, but not so close as to crowd. Start with your right hand, just one note at a time. Harrison's fingers hovered over the keys like birds considering landing. The first note, when it came, was barely a whisper, middle C, pressed with trembling determination. The second followed, then a third, forming the beginning of the familiar melody. Tears sprang to his eyes at the sound. I never thought... Keep going, Emberlyn encouraged softly. Your muscle memory knows the way. Note by note, the melody emerged, halting, imperfect, but unmistakably Mozart. When his hand began to tire, Emberlyn quietly joined in with the left-hand accompaniment, her untrained but earnest playing supporting his efforts like a musical embrace. They played together as snow fell outside, the music growing stronger as Harrison's confidence built. It wasn't the virtuoso performance his younger self had given, but it held something more valuable, the sound of possibility reborn. The final notes faded into reverent silence. Harrison's hand rested on the keys, trembling slightly from exertion. Without thinking, Emberlyn covered it with her own, offering warmth and stability. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "for seeing what could be instead of what was lost." Their eyes met in the piano's reflective surface, and something electric passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood that healing came in many forms. The grandfather clock chimed 9, breaking the spell. Emberlyn withdrew her hand as if burned, suddenly aware of how far they'd strayed from professional boundaries. "We should get you ready for bed. Tomorrow's physical therapy session is early." The return journey to the wheelchair felt heavier somehow, weighted with unspoken words. As she helped him settle, Harrison caught her wrist gently with his recovering hand. "Emberlyn." She forced herself to meet his eyes, to acknowledge the dangerous warmth building there. "Mr. Blackwood." "Thank you," he said again, but this time it carried a different weight. "For showing me that broken things can make beautiful music." That night, long after the household had fallen silent, Emberlyn sat at her window watching snow transform the world. Her fingers moved unconsciously, playing phantom piano keys as she hummed Mozart's Andante. In her mind, she could still feel the warmth of Harrison's hand beneath hers, the way his eyes had reflected firelight and possibility. She was treading dangerous waters, she knew. The lines between professional and personal were blurring like footprints in fresh snow. But as she watched winter wrap the manor in its pristine embrace, Emberlyn realized some boundaries were meant to be crossed, some risks worth taking. After all, as she'd told Harrison, some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible, even when the opponent was your own heart. Chapter 7. The Precipice. January arrived with brutal clarity, bringing with it both the coldest winter in decades and the date of Harrison's experimental nerve regeneration surgery. The procedure, developed by his former company's research division, promised to accelerate his recovery through targeted neural stimulation. The irony of being treated with technology he'd helped pioneer wasn't lost on either of them. The morning of the surgery dawned steel-grey and bitter. Emberlyn had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing his preoperative instructions and double-checking his packed hospital bag. Now she stood in his bedroom doorway, watching the first hint of sunrise paint his walls in watercolor hues. "You're early," Harrison observed, already awake and staring at the ceiling. "It's not even 5. The roads might be icy." She moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency, but her hands betrayed a slight tremor. "I wanted to ensure we had plenty of time." Harrison caught her wrist as she adjusted his collar, a gesture that had become more frequent as his motor control improved. "Emberlyn, look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, fighting to maintain professional distance. Over the past months, she categorized all the different shades of grey in his irises: storm cloud when he was frustrated, polished steel when he was determined, warm pewter in moments like this, when he saw straight through her carefully constructed walls. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said softly. "The real thoughts, not the careful ones." Emberlyn's fingers curled around the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself. "I'm thinking about statistics and complications and how many things could go wrong. I'm thinking about nerve damage and infection rates and—" She drew a shaky breath. "I'm thinking about how quiet this house will be for the next week while you're in the hospital." "Ah." His hand moved from her wrist to cover her fingers where they still gripped his shirt. "And here I thought you'd enjoy the break from my constant demands." "Harrison." His name escaped before she could catch it, heavy with everything she couldn't say. The moment stretched between them like spun sugar, delicate, sweet, and destined to shatter. Mrs. Henderson's footsteps in the hallway broke the spell, and Emberlyn stepped back, resuming her professional mask. The drive to Boston Medical Center passed in tense silence. Snow had fallen overnight, transforming the landscape into something alien and pristine. Harrison watched the world through his window, his right hand opening and closing in unconscious rhythm. A nervous habit he'd developed as sensation returned. "My father died during routine surgery," he said suddenly, his voice barely audible over the car's heater. "I was in college. They said it was an unexpected reaction to the anesthesia. One moment he was there, the next—" His fingers clenched. "That's why I focused my research on medical technology. I wanted to make surgery safer, more predictable. Ironic that I'm now trusting my recovery to the same system that failed him." Emberlyn navigated a particularly icy turn before responding. "The difference is, you're not alone. You have an entire team of doctors who've studied your case, who've prepared for every contingency." She paused, then added softly, "And you have people waiting for you to come back." His reflection in the window smiled slightly. People or person? The hospital loomed before them before she had to answer, its windows blazing against the pre-dawn sky like a constellation of earthbound stars. The next hour passed in a blur of admissions paperwork, pre-operative checks, and final preparations. Emberlyn moved through it all with quiet efficiency, translating medical jargon and anticipating needs before they arose. Finally, they reached the point where she could go no further. The pre-op room was a study in institutional sterility, all chrome and mint green and beeping monitors. Harrison looked smaller somehow in the hospital bed, despite all the progress he'd made. "The surgeon will be in shortly for final consent forms," she said, adjusting his blanket one last time. "Remember to mention the sensitivity in your left side, and don't let them rush through the anesthesia questionnaire." "Emberlyn." His voice stopped her fussing. "I need you to do something for me." She stilled, recognizing the serious note in his tone. "Of course. In my study there's a letter in the top drawer of my desk. If something goes wrong—" "Harrison, don't. If something goes wrong," he continued firmly, "I need you to read it, not before, only if." He swallowed hard. "Promise me." The weight of everything unsaid hung between them like suspended snowflakes. "I promise," she whispered, "but nothing's going to go wrong. You're going to wake up and complain about hospital food and demand Mozart instead of the physical therapy playlist." His laugh was shaky but real. Such confidence. "I learned it from a rather demanding patient." She straightened his IV line, needing something to do with her hands. "Someone who taught me that healing isn't just about the body." The pre-op nurse appeared in the doorway. "Time for final preparations, Mr. Blackwood." Emberlyn stepped back, but Harrison's hand shot out, catching hers. Wait. His grip was stronger than it had been in months, as if his body was choosing this moment to demonstrate how far he'd come. Emberlyn, Tell me after, she interrupted gently, squeezing his hand once before releasing it. When you're back home and complaining about my cooking again. His eyes held hers for a long moment, speaking volumes in their familiar grey depths. Then the medical team swept in, and she had to step away, had to watch as they wheeled him toward the operating theatre where strangers would hold his life in their hands. The waiting room became her prison for the next 8 hours. She paced its confines like a caged tiger, alternating between reviewing his medical files for the 100th time and staring out at the falling snow. Mrs. Henderson brought coffee that grew cold untouched. The cook sent sandwiches that turned to ash in her mouth. Emberlyn found herself bargaining with whatever higher power might be listening. She'd give up everything, her dreams of finishing nursing school, her hopes for her own clinic someday, even the dangerous warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever Harrison smiled, if he would just come through this safely. Please, she whispered to the indifferent snow. Not him too. I can't lose anyone else. The surgery lasted 2 hours longer than scheduled. Each minute stretched like years, each tick of the waiting room clock a small eternity. When the surgeon finally appeared, still in his scrubs, Emberlyn's heart stopped. But he was smiling. The procedure was successful, he announced. We achieved better neural response than expected. Mr. Blackwood is in recovery now. He's asking for you. The relief hit her like a physical force, nearly buckling her knees. Mrs. Henderson steadied her with a knowing look that Emberlyn chose to ignore. Harrison was pale but alert in the recovery room, his eyes finding hers the moment she entered. You look terrible, he rasped, his voice rough from the breathing tube. A laugh that was dangerously close to a sob escaped her. Your bedside manner needs work. Stay. The word was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything they'd left unsaid. Emberlyn sank into the chair beside his bed, her professional mask slipping just enough to let him see her own relief. Always. As snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Boston in pristine white, Emberlyn kept her vigil. She watched the monitors, counted his steady breaths, and allowed herself to imagine a future where some promises didn't have to be kept at arm's length. In his drug-induced sleep, Harrison's fingers twitched, conducting an orchestra only he could hear. Emberlyn hummed Mozart softly, providing the melody to his unconscious symphony, and prayed that when he woke fully, they would find their way to whatever movement came next. Chapter 8. Farewell's Echo. 3 weeks after the surgery, Harrison Blackwood took his first unassisted steps in the manor's solarium. February sunshine streamed through the glass walls, casting his shadow long and straight across the marble floor, a shadow that for the first time in over a year showed a man standing on his own 2 feet. Emberlyn watched from 3 careful paces away, her hands half raised, ready to catch him if needed. But Harrison's stance was steady, his newly awakened muscles trembling but holding. The moment felt sacred, like witnessing a miracle in real time. "Well," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I suppose this means you'll be leaving soon." The words hit Emberlyn like a physical blow. She'd been dreading this moment, putting off the inevitable with each new milestone in his recovery. Now, watching him stand independently in the winter sunshine, she could no longer deny that her professional duties were coming to an end. That evening, after ensuring Harrison was settled for the night, Emberlyn sat at the antique writing desk in her quarters. The manor was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old wood settling, like the house itself was holding its breath. "Dear Harrison," she began, then crossed it out. "Dear Mr. Blackwood." She tried again, the formality feeling like armor against the emotions threatening to spill onto the page. When I first arrived at Blackwood Manor, I was running from one loss and straight into another. I didn't expect to find healing here, not just for you, but for myself. You taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about choosing to rise again, even when standing seems impossible. Her pen paused, hovering over the cream-colored stationery as memories flooded back. Harrison's first intentional finger movement during Mozart's Andante, his laughter when she burned the toast one morning and tried to hide it, the way his eyes held hers during physical therapy sessions when pain threatened to overwhelm him. Your recovery has been more than medical progress. I've watched you rediscover joy in small moments. The first time you held a coffee cup without help, the evening you played piano again, today's triumphant steps. Each victory reminded me why I chose this path, this calling to help others find their way back to themselves. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. Professional distance, she reminded herself. That had been the rule from the beginning, though somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred like watercolors, bleeding into each other. The medical team believes you'll regain approximately 85% of your former mobility. Your nerve conduction tests show consistent improvement, and the surgical site is healing beautifully. You no longer require full-time care, which means my services are no longer necessary. Clinical language felt safer, though it couldn't fully mask the emotion beneath. Outside her window, snow began to fall again, each flake catching moonlight like falling stars. But necessity isn't the whole story, is it? We both know that. There are moments when duty and desire intersect in ways that make continuing impossible. You once asked why I became a caregiver instead of pursuing medical school. The truth is, I chose this path because I believed that healing happens in the quiet moments between medical procedures, in the human connection that can't be measured by monitors or documented in charts. Her hand shook slightly as she continued, "You've shown me that belief wasn't misplaced. You've also shown me why maintaining professional boundaries is so crucial, because sometimes, in those quiet moments, in the space between caregiver and patient, something else grows, something that makes objective care impossible." The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, its deep tones reverberating through the manor like a heartbeat. "I'm leaving because you deserve the best care possible, and I can no longer trust myself to provide that with the objectivity required. Your recovery is my greatest joy and my signal to step away. Some dreams are meant to remain unspoken, some hearts unlent." Emberlyn paused, gathering courage for the hardest part. "The truth is, Harrison, I've learned more from you than I ever taught you about healing. You showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help takes more courage than refusing it. You reminded me that music can heal what medicine can't reach, and that some broken things, when mended, become stronger at the fractured places. I've arranged for a highly qualified physical therapist to continue your rehabilitation. Mrs. Henderson has detailed notes about your daily routines, preferences, and medical needs. Everything is in order for a smooth transition." The next words felt like they were being torn from her heart. "Please don't try to find me. This goodbye needs to be clean and complete. You have a remarkable life ahead of you, one where you'll stand tall not just physically, but in all the ways that matter. My role in that story was always meant to be temporary, a chapter rather than the whole book. Take care of yourself. Remember your exercises, especially on days when it seems easier not to try. Keep playing Mozart. Your finger dexterity improves remarkably during music therapy. And please, don't stop believing in miracles. You are living proof that they exist." She signed it simply, "Forever grateful, Emberlyn." The letter complete, she sealed it in an envelope and wrote his name with steady hands that belied her trembling heart. Tomorrow morning, While he was at his physical therapy session, she would leave it on his desk and slip away before he returned. But for now, she moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass as snow continued to fall. Somewhere in the manor, she could hear the faint strains of Mozart. Harrison must be playing the piano, his recovered muscles growing stronger with each practice session. Emberlyn closed her eyes, memorizing the moment. The music, the snowfall, the quiet ache in her chest that felt like growth and loss wrapped together. She had arrived at Blackwood Manor to help someone else heal, never expecting her own heart would be the one most changed by the experience. The music shifted to the andante movement, their movement. In the snowy darkness, Emberlyn allowed herself one moment of weakness, one tear for everything she was choosing to leave behind. Then, like she had taught Harrison to do during the hardest parts of his recovery, she took a deep breath and focused on the next step forward, even though standing felt impossible. Tomorrow would bring its own kind of paralysis, the inability to stay when everything in her yearned to remain. But for tonight, she let Mozart's notes wrap around her like a farewell embrace, knowing that some goodbyes were necessary precisely because of how much they hurt. Chapter 9. Desperate Search. The letter felt like lead in Harrison's hands as he stood in his study, winter sunlight streaming through windows that suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. He had returned from physical therapy to find his world tilted on its axis. Emberlyn gone, leaving only carefully typed medical instructions and this handwritten goodbye that threatened to shatter what remained of his composure. "Sir?" Mrs. Henderson hovered in the doorway, concern etching deeper lines around her eyes. "You haven't eaten since yesterday. The cook made your favorite. How long?" His voice was rough, unfamiliar. "How long did you know she was planning to leave?" The housekeeper's silence was answer enough. Harrison turned to face her, his newly recovered balance perfect, despite the emotional earthquake rocking his foundations. "You helped her plan this, didn't you?" "She wanted to ensure a smooth transition," Mrs. Henderson said carefully. "Miss Thorne was very thorough in her preparations for your continued care." "Thorough?" The word tasted bitter. Yes, she always was thorough, every detail considered, every contingency planned. His fingers clenched around the letter, then deliberately relaxed. A victory of control he would have celebrated mere hours ago. Now it felt hollow. Except she forgot one rather crucial detail. "Sir?" She forgot that I'm no longer the paralyzed man who needs protection from his own feelings. Harrison moved to his desk, each step a testament to months of work, of Emberlyn's patient guidance. "Call Thomas. Have him bring the car around." "Mr. Blackwood, you're not strong enough for—" "I'm strong enough to stand, to walk, to chase what matters." He was already reaching for his coat. "She taught me that." The search began methodically, because that's how Emberlyn would have approached it. Harrison visited every hospital in Boston, every clinic where a skilled caregiver might seek employment. His recovered muscles trembled with exhaustion, but he pushed through, driven by a need that transcended physical limitations. Days blurred together. He barely slept, subsisting on coffee and determination. His physical therapist warned about overtaxing his recovering nerves, but Harrison merely adjusted his exercises to accommodate his search. He would not let his body's limitations dictate the boundaries of his heart again. "She was here," a nurse at Massachusetts General finally told him 2 weeks into his search. "Interviewed for a position in the rehabilitation ward. Highly qualified, impressive references." The nurse paused. "But she turned down the offer. Said something about needing a different kind of healing." Another week passed. Harrison's appetite vanished, food turning to ash in his mouth. He lost weight, his recovered strength threatening to fade, but still he searched, expanding his radius, following every lead. "You're killing yourself," Mrs. Henderson observed one evening, finding him in his study surrounded by maps and phone records. She wouldn't want this. She doesn't get to decide what I want anymore. Harrison's voice was quiet, but intense. She made choices for me when I couldn't make them myself. But I can stand now. I can walk. I can choose. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The cook's daughter, who volunteered at local nursing homes, mentioned a new caregiver at St. Clair's Home for the Elderly who hummed Mozart while changing beds. Harrison was there within the hour, his heart thundering against his ribs as he stepped through the facility's doors. The place smelled of antiseptic and old memories, its halls lined with wheelchairs and walking frames, tools he had only recently left behind. And there she was. Emberlyn stood in the common room, helping an elderly man with physical therapy exercises, similar to the ones she had done with Harrison countless times. Her hair was pulled back in its familiar practical style, but something in her face had changed, a sadness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She looked up, somehow sensing his presence, and the world stopped spinning for one perfect moment. Harrison. His name fell from her lips like a prayer or a curse. You shouldn't be here. Shouldn't I? He took a step forward, then another, each movement a demonstration of what she had helped him achieve. You left without giving me a choice. I left because it was necessary. But her voice trembled, betraying the conviction of her words. Necessary for whom? Another step closer. The elderly residents watched with undisguised interest, sensing the drama unfolding before them. You wrote about professional boundaries and objective care. But tell me, Emberlyn, was there anything objective about the way you taught me to believe in myself again? Was it just professional duty that had you playing Mozart until midnight, celebrating every small victory as if it were your own? Please. She took a step back, maintaining the distance between them. Don't make this harder. It's already hard. His voice softened. It's been hard since the first time you hummed Mozart while changing my bandages, since you cut the crusts off my toast without being asked, since you saw me, not as a broken man to be fixed, but as a person worth fighting for. Tears gathered in her eyes. I can't be your caregiver anymore. Good. He closed the distance between them with steady steps that proved how well she had taught him to stand on his own. Because I don't need a caregiver. I need the woman who believed in miracles, even when I'd stopped believing. I need the person who taught me that healing isn't just about the body, but about the heart. Harrison, I love you. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that couldn't be undone. I love your strength, your compassion, your stubborn determination to help others heal even when you're hurting. I love that you see broken things as opportunities for growth rather than tragedy. And I love that you were willing to walk away to protect what you thought was best for me, even though you were completely, beautifully wrong. Emberlyn's tears spilled over, tracking silent paths down her cheeks. I can't blur the lines between... The lines were blurred the moment you started seeing me as Harrison instead of Mr. Blackwood. The moment I started seeing you as more than just another caregiver. He reached for her hand, his recovered fingers now strong enough to interlace with hers. Some boundaries are meant to be crossed, Emberlyn. Some risks are worth taking. The elderly man she'd been helping began to applaud, setting off a chain reaction through the common room. But Harrison and Emberlyn barely noticed, caught in a moment that felt both completely new and somehow inevitable. I can't go back to being your caregiver, she whispered, though her fingers tightened around his. Then be my partner instead. He brought their joined hands to his chest, letting her feel his heartbeat. Be the person who continues to believe in miracles with me. Be the one who helps me discover what other impossible things we can achieve together. Around them, Mozart played softly from someone's radio, the Andante movement that had become their unofficial theme. And in that moment, surrounded by witnesses to love's ability to heal what medicine couldn't touch, Emberlyn stopped running from her heart's truth. Yes, she breathed, and the word contained all the music they had ever shared, all the victories they had celebrated, all the possibilities that lay ahead. Harrison pulled her close, his recovered strength now dedicated to holding what mattered most. And as February sunshine painted the world in shades of promise, two souls who had learned to heal each other found that some boundaries, when crossed with love, lead not to ruin, but to redemption. Chapter 10. Reckoning. Spring arrived at Blackwood Manor like a watercolor painting coming to life, cherry blossoms dotting the grounds in delicate pink clouds. 2 months had passed since Harrison had found Emberlyn at St. Clair's, 2 months of redefining boundaries and building something entirely new from the foundations of their shared past. The morning everything changed, dawned picture-perfect. Sunlight streaming through the solarium windows as Harrison and Emberlyn shared breakfast. Their new routine felt both familiar and thrillingly different, no longer caregiver and patient, but two people learning to navigate love's delicate dance. "You're still watching my hands," Harrison observed, deliberately lifting his coffee cup with steady fingers. "Old habits?" Emberlyn smiled, caught in her unconscious monitoring. "Professional concern dies hard, I suppose." "Nothing professional about the way you're looking at me now," he teased, reaching across the table to catch her hand. The gesture, once impossible, now felt as natural as breathing. The moment shattered at the sound of heels clicking against marble floors. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "Mr. Blackwood, you have visitors." Vanessa Blackwood swept into the solarium like a storm front, designer perfume and barely contained fury preceding her. Behind her, their son James followed, looking uncomfortable in his perfectly tailored suit. "Hello, Harrison." Vanessa's voice could have frozen the spring blooms outside. "I see the rumors about your miracle recovery weren't exaggerated." Her gaze cut to where his hand still held Emberlyn's. Nor were the other rumors, apparently. Harrison's fingers tightened protectively around Emberlyn's before releasing them. He stood, smoothly, steadily, a deliberate display of his recovery, and faced his ex-wife. "Vanessa, this is unexpected." "Is it?" She placed a Hermes bag on a nearby table with calculated precision. "When my lawyer informed me you'd filed to revoke the medical power of attorney I still held, I thought perhaps we should have a conversation. Any legal matters can be handled through our attorneys." Harrison's voice was controlled, but Emberlyn could see tension in his shoulders. "James," Vanessa turned to their son, who had remained silent. "Don't you have anything to say to your father?" The young man shifted uncomfortably. At 17, he bore a striking resemblance to Harrison's old photographs. Same strong jaw, same storm-grey eyes. But where Harrison's gaze held warmth, James's remained guarded. "You look well, father," he said formally, as if addressing a stranger. In many ways, Emberlyn realized, that's exactly what they were to each other. "Thank you." Harrison's voice softened. "You've grown. The Swiss air agrees with you." "Oh, let's dispense with the pleasantries." Vanessa's smile was razor-sharp. "You're looking remarkably well for someone who was supposedly incurably paralyzed. One might almost suspect." Her gaze slid to Emberlyn like oil on water. "Choose your next words carefully, Vanessa." Steel entered Harrison's tone. "You walked away when I needed support most. You don't get to question the methods of my recovery now." "I questioned plenty at the time." Vanessa's perfect composure cracked slightly. "Every treatment option, every specialist. But you were so determined to do things your way." "No." Harrison's interruption was quiet, but firm. "You questioned how my condition would affect your social standing. You asked about optics and public relations before asking about my prognosis. Don't rewrite history now." James watched this exchange with growing discomfort. Mother, perhaps we should— Your father abandoned his responsibilities, Vanessa cut in, to the company, to our position in society. To you? Harrison's laugh held no humor. Yes, how inconsiderate of me to become ill and disrupt your carefully planned life. Tell me, did you even read the medical reports before filing for divorce, or did you just sign where your lawyer indicated? Emberlyn stood quietly, moving to leave them to their family discussion, but Harrison caught her hand. Stay, please. His eyes met hers, conveying volumes. You're part of this now. Ah, yes. The miracle worker. Vanessa's tone dripped sarcasm. Tell me, dear, was it before or after he regained feeling that you decided to upgrade from caregiver to companion? That's enough. Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. You can question my choices, Vanessa, but you will not insult the woman who stood by me when my own wife ran at the first sign of difficulty. I moved with the boy who will inherit everything you've built, she corrected. I protected our son's future while you wallowed in self-pity. Protected him. Something dangerous entered Harrison's tone. You shipped him across an ocean rather than let him see that life isn't perfect, that people can struggle and still recover, that love means staying even when things get hard. James made a small sound, drawing their attention. The boy, almost a man, stood straighter under their combined gaze. I wanted to stay, he said quietly. I asked to stay. The words fell into sudden silence like stones into still water. Vanessa's perfect composure slipped further. James, don't— No, Mother. His voice grew stronger. I wanted to help. I wasn't afraid of seeing Father ill. I was afraid of never seeing him again. He turned to Harrison, years of unspoken words hovering between them. I read about your recovery online, every article, every medical update. I'm proud of you, Father. Harrison's hand trembled slightly in Emberlyn's grasp, not from weakness now, but from emotion. Thank you, son. How touching. Vanessa's voice could have frosted the spring blooms. But sentiment doesn't change facts. The board of directors has already voted to reinstate me, Harrison interrupted smoothly. As of last week, I'm back as head of research and development, not CEO. I've found I prefer focusing on innovation rather than corporate politics. Speaking of which, he reached into his jacket, withdrawing an envelope. These are the papers transferring 20% of my shares to James directly, not to his trust fund, not to be managed by you, to him. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds outside seemed to hold their breath. I've learned something about trust this past year, Harrison continued, his thumb brushing Emberlyn's knuckles. It's earned through presence, through staying when things are difficult, through believing in possibility even when evidence suggests otherwise. He looked at his son. I'd like the chance to earn your trust again, James, not through stock shares or social position, but through being present, if you'll allow it. James nodded, emotion making him look younger suddenly. I'd like that. How dare you? Vanessa's composure shattered completely. After everything I've sacrificed— You sacrificed nothing, Harrison said quietly. You ran from sacrifice, you ran from difficulty, you ran from the kind of love that stays. He squeezed Emberlyn's hand. But I'm not running anymore. And I'm not letting you dictate the terms of my relationship with our son. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but something in Harrison's expression stopped her. Perhaps she finally saw what Emberlyn had seen months ago. Not a broken man, but someone who had rebuilt himself stronger at the broken places. Come, James. She gathered her designer bag like armor. We're leaving. Actually, Mother. James straightened his shoulders. I think I'd like to stay for a while. If that's all right, Father? The smile that broke across Harrison's face was like sunrise after storm. More than all right. They watched Vanessa's departure in silence, her heels clicking against marble with military precision. When she was gone, James turned to his father with uncertain hope. "I have so many questions. I have answers." Harrison gestured to the breakfast table. "And time. Finally, I have time." He looked at Emberlyn, love clear in his eyes. "We all do." As they settled around the table, father, son, and the woman who had helped make healing possible, spring sunlight painted them in gentle watercolors. Outside, cherry blossoms continued their elegant dance, and somewhere in the distance, a new song was beginning. The music was no longer Mozart's Andante, but something entirely new, a composition of second chances and rebuilt trust, of love that stays and grows stronger through adversity. And in the gentle morning light, 3 people began the delicate work of building something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. Chapter 11. Hearts Unbound. May transformed Blackwood Manor's gardens into a symphony of colour and fragrance, roses climbing ancient trellises while wisteria cascaded in purple waterfalls. In the month since Vanessa's confrontation, life had settled into new rhythms. James visited weekends, slowly rebuilding bridges with his father through shared meals and tentative conversations about the future. Harrison's return to the company's research division brought fresh purpose to his days, and Emberlyn, no longer bound by professional constraints, discovered what it meant to be loved not for what she gave, but for who she was. The evening Harrison chose was perfect. Sunset painting the sky in watercolor hues of rose and gold, the air sweet with jasmine and possibility. He had asked Emberlyn to meet him in the greenhouse, where their story had truly begun months ago, with broken orchids and shared confessions. "You've arranged everything differently," Emberlyn observed as she entered, noting how the plants had been shifted to create a winding path through the tropical foliage. Tiny lights twinkled among the leaves like earthbound stars. "I had help." Harrison emerged from behind a stand of bamboo, moving with the fluid grace that still sometimes surprised them both. "James has quite the eye for design, it seems." The mention of his son brought a warm smile to Emberlyn's face. "He's blooming here, you know, like these orchids. All they needed was the right environment to thrive." "Speaking of orchids," Harrison guided her around a corner, where a familiar white bloom held court among its more exotic cousins. "Do you remember this one?" "The Survivor." Emberlyn's fingers ghosted over delicate petals. "From the broken pot, that day when you first moved your fingers intentionally. You saved it." His voice held meaning beyond the flower. "You saw beauty and possibility where others might have seen only wreckage." "Harrison, let me finish." He took her hands in his touch sure and steady, a miracle they both still marveled at daily. "When you first came here, I was like that broken pot, shattered, not just physically, but in spirit. I'd lost faith in everything, my body's ability to heal, people's capacity for genuine care, love's power to endure difficulty." Emberlyn's heart thundered against her ribs as Harrison continued, his grey eyes holding hers with unwavering intensity. "You didn't just help me rebuild my strength. You showed me that true healing goes deeper than muscle and nerve. You taught me that real love isn't about perfection. It's about seeing the beauty in broken things and believing in their potential to become whole again." With graceful movement that would have been impossible months ago, Harrison lowered himself to one knee. The motion was smooth, controlled, a testament to countless hours of therapy and determination. "I planned 1,000 perfect words for this moment," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "But standing here, looking at you in the same place where you first showed me that miracles are possible, I find myself thinking of simpler truths." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Inside, nestled a ring unlike any Emberlyn had seen. Not a traditional diamond solitaire, but a delicate band of rose gold wrapped around a pearl with tiny diamonds scattered like stars around it. "The pearl has a story," Harrison explained softly. "It began as an irritation, a grain of sand that should have been a flaw, but through time and pressure it transformed into something precious. Like us, like love itself, beauty can come from adversity if we're patient enough, brave enough to let it form." Tears spilled down Emberlyn's cheeks as Harrison continued, his own eyes bright with emotion. "I love you, Emberlyn Thorne. Not because you helped heal me, though you did. Not because you stayed when others left, though that showed your character. I love you because you taught me that strength isn't about never needing help, it's about being brave enough to accept it. Because you showed me that love isn't about avoiding life's hardships, but about facing them together." His fingers, once paralyzed but now strong and sure, opened the ring box fully. "You came into my life as a caregiver, became my miracle worker, and evolved into my heart's compass. Now I'm asking you to take on a new role, not as someone who has to fix or heal or sacrifice, but as my partner, my equal, my love." The greenhouse held its breath as Harrison asked, "Will you marry me, Emberlyn? Will you help me write the next chapters of our story, whatever they may hold?" Time seemed to suspend, the moment crystallizing like amber preserving something precious. In that pause, Emberlyn saw their whole journey flash before her. The first morning she'd entered this greenhouse, both of them broken in different ways. The countless therapy sessions where determination overcame despair. Mozart playing while winter stars watched through glass walls. The moment she'd left, thinking professional distance could protect her heart, the joy of reunion and revelation. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Not from weakness now, but from joy. As he rose to his feet, pulling her into an embrace that spoke of strength restored and love triumphant, the greenhouse erupted in gentle applause. James emerged from behind a screen of ferns, grinning widely. Mrs. Henderson appeared from the shadows, dabbing at her eyes with her ever-present handkerchief. Even the cook and gardener stepped forward, their presence revealing this moment had been orchestrated with the help of the entire household. "Welcome to the family officially," James said, stepping forward to hug Emberlyn. "Though you've been part of it since the day you first made Father smile again." As congratulations flowed around them, Harrison kept his arm around Emberlyn's waist, as if unable to let her go now that she had agreed to stay forever. Above them, the greenhouse glass reflected the last rays of sunset, turning their private jungle into a cathedral of light and shadow. "I have something for you too," Emberlyn said softly when the excitement had calmed slightly. From her pocket, she withdrew an envelope, worn now from being carried close to her heart. Harrison recognized his own handwriting on the front, the letter he'd asked her to read only if something went wrong during his surgery. "You never opened it." "I never needed to." She pressed it back into his hands. "Some things don't need words on paper. They just need faith and time and love, strong enough to endure." As twilight settled over Blackwood Manor, music began to play. Mozart's Andante, their song, drifting through hidden speakers James had helped install. Harrison drew Emberlyn into a dance, his movements sure and strong, while their family watched with joy. The white orchid stood witness to their happiness, its survival a testament to the truth they'd both learned. That sometimes the most beautiful things grow from places once broken, and love's greatest miracles often come disguised as life's greatest challenges. Chapter 12. Love's Symphony. June brought perfect blue skies to Blackwood Manor, as if heaven itself had dressed for the occasion. The garden, where months ago Harrison had taken his first unassisted steps, had been transformed into an enchanted realm. Thousands of white orchids, propagated from their survivor bloom, cascaded from arbors and twined around columns. Crystal chandeliers hung from century-old maple trees, waiting for twilight to catch their fire. In what had once been her caregiver's suite, Emberlyn stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing her reflection. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of simplicity, ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate pearl beading that echoed her engagement ring. But it was her eyes that caught her attention. They shone with a light that spoke of dreams, not just fulfilled, but exceeded. "You look like a fairy tale," Mrs. Henderson said softly, adjusting the cathedral veil with hands that trembled slightly. "Though I suspect Mr. Blackwood would marry you in a potato sack." "He did offer to elope," Emberlyn admitted, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the silk. "But some moments deserve celebration." "Some miracles deserve witnesses," the housekeeper corrected gently. She lifted a small box from the dresser. "Speaking of which, this arrived from Harrison. He said it's not a wedding gift. That's coming later. This is something else." Inside the box lay a delicate silver charm bracelet. Each charm told a piece of their story. A tiny piano for their Mozart sessions, an orchid for the greenhouse revelation, a medical caduceus for her dream of helping others heal, a snowflake for the winter that changed everything. But it was the note accompanying it that brought tears to Emberlyn's eyes. "My love." Each charm represents a moment when you helped rebuild me, not just physically, but in all the ways that matter. Today, as we join our lives officially, I want you to carry these reminders of how thoroughly you've already restored my faith in miracles. Today and always. Harrison. A knock at the door interrupted her emotional moment. James entered, looking handsome and grown up in his best man's tuxedo. "Father sent me to check if you're having second thoughts about joining our crazy family," he said with a grin that mirrored Harrison's. "Though I'm supposed to convince you to stay if you are." Emberlyn laughed, dabbing carefully at her eyes. "No chance of escape plans. I'm exactly where I want to be." "Good." James's expression softened. "You know, I used to be angry that you helped him when we didn't, but I've realized something. Sometimes it takes an outsider to show us what real love looks like. You taught our whole family that." Before Emberlyn could respond, music began drifting through the open windows. Not Mozart this time, but a string quartet playing something original. Harrison had commissioned it specially, weaving themes from their beloved Andante into a new composition that spoke of transformation and joy. "That's our cue," Mrs. Henderson said, doing one final check of Emberlyn's appearance. "Ready to become Mrs. Blackwood?" "I've been ready since I first heard him play Mozart again," Emberlyn admitted softly. The garden path to the ceremony site had been laid with white rose petals, their fragrance rising like incense in the warm June air. As Emberlyn began her walk, guests rose in appreciation, but she hardly noticed them. Her entire world narrowed to the man waiting beneath an arch of orchids and roses. Harrison stood tall and straight, his recovery now so complete that newcomers would never guess the journey that had brought him here. But Emberlyn saw beyond the perfect posture and confident stance. She saw the warrior who had fought his way back from paralysis, the man who had learned that vulnerability could be strength, the soul who had taught her that some kinds of healing went deeper than medicine could reach. Their eyes met across the diminishing distance, and in that moment, all the roles they had played for each other, caregiver and patient, healer and healed, teacher and student, dissolved into something simpler and more profound, two hearts recognizing their other half. Harrison's hands were rock steady as he took hers, though his eyes shone with unshed tears. The minister began the ceremony, but the words seemed to float around them like the flower petals on the breeze, secondary to the symphony of silent communication passing between their joined hands. When it came time for their vows, Harrison spoke first, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed garden. "Emberlyn, you came into my life when I believed all my music had ended. You showed me that even in life's darkest movements, new melodies can begin. You taught me that strength isn't about standing alone, but about being brave enough to lean on someone else until you remember how to dance." His thumb brushed across her knuckles as he continued, "I vow to be your partner in all of life's symphonies. Both the harmonious passages and the challenging ones. I promise to cherish not just your capacity to heal others, but your own need sometimes to be held and healed. I vow to remember that love, like recovery, is a daily choice. And I choose you, today and always." Tears spilled freely down Emberlyn's cheeks as she responded, "Harrison, you think I taught you about healing, but you taught me about living. You showed me that sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones that have been broken and rebuilt. You helped me understand that caring for others doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It means finding someone who makes you stronger through partnership." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, "I vow to be your equal in all things, to celebrate your triumphs and support you through challenges. I promise to remember that miracles don't just happen. They're built day by day through love, faith, and determination. I vow to dance with you through whatever music life plays, and to help create new songs when the old ones end." The exchange of rings felt like a formality. Their truest bonds had been forged months ago through shared struggles and victories. But when Harrison's hands, once paralyzed but now sure and strong, slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join her pearl engagement ring, the symbolism brought fresh tears to both their eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, but they had barely waited for his "you may kiss the bride" before coming together in a kiss that spoke of endings and beginnings, of battles won and horizons yet to explore. As they turned to face their cheering guests, the string quartet began their commissioned piece again. But this time, as twilight painted the sky in watercolor hues and crystals began to catch the first starlight, Harrison surprised everyone by leading Emberlyn not toward the reception tent, but to the baby grand piano that had been positioned in the garden. His fingers, strong and sure now, began to play. Not their usual Mozart, but something new. Notes rose into the evening air like prayers of gratitude, and as Emberlyn recognized the melody he'd helped compose for their wedding, she realized it was both a celebration of their journey and a promise of adventures yet to come. They had begun as caregiver and patient, became partners in healing, and emerged as equals in love. And as Harrison played their song beneath a canopy of stars and orchids, surrounded by family and friends who had witnessed their miracle, Emberlyn knew that some symphonies never truly end. They just transform into even more beautiful movements. Chapter 13. Full Circle. 5 years had transformed Blackwood Manor from a place of healing into a sanctuary of joy. The grounds, once formal and austere, now echoed with children's laughter as 4-year-old Charlotte Grace Blackwood chased butterflies through her mother's carefully tended garden. Her younger brother, Thomas Harrison Blackwood, toddled after her on chubby 2-year-old legs, determined to keep up with his sister. Emberlyn watched from the greenhouse doorway as Harrison swung their daughter up into his arms, his movements fluid and strong, no trace remaining of the paralysis that had once threatened to define his life. Charlotte's giggles mixed with the sound of wind chimes Mrs. Henderson had hung throughout the garden, creating a symphony of domestic bliss that still sometimes caught Emberlyn off guard with its perfection. "Mama!" Charlotte called, waving frantically. "Papa's showing me the orchids you saved. Can we grow more?" "Your mother Harrison said, carrying their daughter toward the greenhouse, is the finest orchid whisperer in all of New England. Did you know she once saved a very special flower that everyone else thought was broken beyond repair? Like you, Papa? Charlotte asked, with the innocent wisdom of childhood. Mommy said she helped make you better when you were sick. Harrison's eyes met Emberlyn's over their daughter's dark curls, love and gratitude still evident after all these years. Yes, my dear, exactly like that. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Henderson's appearance on the terrace. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood, there's someone at the door asking for Emberlyn, a young man. Emberlyn's heart stuttered as she recognized the figure standing uncertainly in the manor's entrance hall. Asher had aged in the years since she'd last seen him, lines around his eyes speaking of hardship, his once pristine clothes showing signs of wear. Lynn, he said softly, using the childhood nickname that suddenly felt like a stone in her throat. I didn't know where else to go. Harrison appeared silently beside her, Thomas drowsing against his shoulder. His presence offered strength without pressure, support without demands. He had learned about Asher over their years together, understood the complex web of love and pain that bound Emberlyn to her brother. Ruby left, Asher continued into the silence. Took everything. I've been trying to make it on my own, but... He swallowed hard. I remember what you said, about helping those who have no claim on you. I thought maybe... Mama? Charlotte tugged at Emberlyn's skirt, looking curiously at the stranger. Who's that man? The question crystallized something in Emberlyn's heart. Looking at her daughter, who had her eyes and Harrison's smile, she saw how far she had come from the young woman who had defined herself solely through sacrifice for others. That's your Uncle Asher, she said quietly. Someone who needs help remembering how to stand on his own. Harrison's free hand found hers, squeezing gently in support of whatever she decided. This was what real partnership meant. Not solving each other's problems, but standing together as decisions were made. There's a position open at the rehabilitation center, Emberlyn said carefully. The center was her pride and joy, a state-of-the-art facility she and Harrison had opened 2 years ago, combining his medical technology innovations with her practical experience in patient care. Entry-level, but it's honest work, and, she glanced at Harrison, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We have a guest house on the grounds. Asher's eyes filled with tears. After everything I did, everything I said. I learned something important from a very wise patient, Emberlyn said, feeling Harrison's smile without having to look. Sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones that have been broken and rebuilt. Sometimes healing comes through helping others find their way back to themselves. I don't deserve a second chance, Asher whispered. No one deserves chance, Harrison spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. They earn them through choices and actions. The question is, what will you choose to do with this one? Charlotte, ever her father's daughter in intuition, walked over to Asher and took his hand with the simple trust of childhood. Want to see Mama's special orchids? They were broken, but now they're pretty again. A laugh that was half sob escaped Asher as he let his niece pull him toward the greenhouse. Emberlyn watched them go, feeling the perfect rightness of the moment, not because everything was fixed, but because she was finally strong enough to offer help without losing herself in the giving. That evening, after the children were asleep, and Asher had settled into the guest house with promises to report for work training the next day, Emberlyn and Harrison sat in their favorite spot in the garden. The same bench where he had once struggled through physical therapy now held them comfortably as they watched stars emerge above the maple trees. Thank you, she said softly, leaning into his embrace, for understanding why I needed to help him. You taught me about second chances, Harrison reminded her, pressing a kiss to her temple. About seeing potential in broken things. How could I do any less? From the house came the faint sounds of Mozart, James practicing for his upcoming conservatory audition. He spent every holiday and school break at the manor now, his relationship with his father fully healed. Even Vanessa had mellowed somewhat, though her visits were still primarily confined to major holidays and grandchildren's birthdays. "Do you ever regret it?" Harrison asked suddenly, "taking on a broken man as your patient all those years ago?" Emberlyn turned in his arms to face him, seeing in his eyes not the powerful medical innovator the world knew, but the vulnerable soul who had taught her that love was worth every risk. "The only thing I regret was almost walking away when I fell in love with you." He kissed her then, 5 years of marriage having done nothing to diminish the spark between them. Above them, the wind chimes played their gentle symphony, mixing with distant Mozart and the rustle of maple leaves in the summer breeze. Life had taught them both that healing rarely followed a straight path. Sometimes it took detours through heartbreak, through letting go, through learning to trust not just others but yourself. But as they sat together in the garden that had witnessed their journey from caregiver and patient to equals in love, they knew that the most beautiful symphonies were often the ones composed of both harmony and discord, of endings that became beginnings, of broken things made whole again through love's patient grace. Charlotte's orchid collection would soon fill an entire greenhouse. Asher would slowly earn back his place in their family through small choices and consistent effort. Thomas would grow up to combine his father's brilliant mind with his mother's compassionate heart. And Harrison and Emberlyn would continue to build their life together, knowing that every day was a choice to heal, to grow, and to love. Not despite their broken places, but because of how beautifully they had learned to mend them together. Final chapter. Love's eternal lessons. 10 years after Emberlyn first walked through Blackwood Manor's gates, she stood in the hospital auditorium, addressing a graduating class of nursing students. The lecture hall was packed with young faces, eager to begin their caregiving journeys. But her message went beyond medical training. "When I first became a caregiver," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room, "I thought healing was about fixing what was broken. I had spent my whole life trying to fix things, my broken family, my lost brother, other people's pain. It took a patient who became my greatest teacher to show me that true healing isn't about fixing people. It's about standing beside them while they find the strength to rebuild themselves." In the front row, Harrison sat with their children. Charlotte, now 9, and already showing signs of her mother's compassionate heart. Thomas, 7, with his father's analytical mind. And their youngest, Hope, 5, who combined both parents' strongest traits. Beside them sat James, now a successful concert pianist, who performed benefit concerts for their rehabilitation center. "To the struggling women out there," Emberlyn continued, her voice softening with emotion, "I want to share what this journey has taught me. Your worth isn't measured by how much you sacrifice for others. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is allow yourself to be loved. Sometimes the strongest choice is accepting help instead of always being the helper." She touched the charm bracelet she still wore, now heavy with a decade's worth of meaningful moments. "To those who think love isn't possible because life has left you feeling broken, your scars are not flaws to be hidden, but proof of your resilience. The right person won't ask you to be perfect. They'll help you discover that your broken places can become the source of your greatest strength." Harrison's eyes met hers across the room, still holding the same love that had transformed both their lives. Their story had become something of a legend in medical circles. The paralyzed tech innovator and the caregiver who helped him walk again. But the true miracle, they both knew, wasn't in the physical recovery. It was in learning that love doesn't divide when shared. It multiplies. And to the men who believe loyalty and commitment are outdated concepts, she added, her voice carrying a gentle challenge. Look around you. Real strength isn't in never needing help, it's in being brave enough to accept it. True masculinity isn't about never showing weakness. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to stand by someone through their darkest moments, to love not in spite of imperfections, but because of how beautifully they can be overcome together. In the audience, Asher sat with his new wife, a kind-hearted physical therapist who had helped him learn that love was about growth, not possession. Their 2-year-old daughter slept peacefully in his arms, a symbol of how far he had come in his own journey of healing. Our story isn't just about romance, Emberlyn continued. It's about the choice we make every day to see the best in each other, to believe in possibility even when evidence suggests otherwise. It's about understanding that sometimes our greatest struggles become our greatest gifts if we're brave enough to learn from them and fortunate enough to find people who help us carry them. She gestured to the rehabilitation center, visible through the auditorium windows, a modern facility that combined Harrison's technological innovations with her practical caregiving experience. This center stands as testament to what can be built when we combine innovation with compassion, when we understand that healing happens not just through medicine, but through love, patience, and unwavering faith in human potential. The students listened intently as she concluded, "So, if this story touches your heart, share it. Not because it's a fairy tale. We've had our struggles, our doubts, our moments of fear. Share it because it's real. Because it shows that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who teaches you that perfection isn't the goal. Growth is." As she stepped down from the podium, Harrison met her halfway, taking her hand in his still strong grip. In the decade since his recovery, he had never taken their ability to touch for granted. Each caress, each embrace remained a celebration of possibility. Their children surrounded them, followed by James and his wife Asher and his family, and even Vanessa, who had finally found peace with their happiness. Mrs. Henderson now, retired but still a beloved part of their extended family, dabbed at her eyes with her ever-present handkerchief. That evening, as sunset painted the manor in shades of promise, the family gathered in the garden that had witnessed so much of their journey. The original orchid, the survivor that had started it all, had propagated into hundreds, creating a living testament to how beauty multiplies when nurtured with love. Mozart played softly from the conservatory, where Charlotte practiced piano under James's tutelage. Thomas explained his latest science project to Harrison, while Hope helped Emberlyn tend to new orchid shoots. The scene was beautifully ordinary, and all the more precious for being once thought impossible. "To anyone reading this story," Emberlyn whispered to the evening air, "know that your broken places don't define you. They prepare you for a love strong enough to handle both your scars and your light. Share this message not because it's ours, but because it might be someone's hope when they need it most." Harrison squeezed her hand, still able to read her thoughts after all these years. Above them, the first stars appeared, while wind chimes played their gentle symphony. The music of their life together had evolved from Mozart's Andante to something richer, a composition of family bonds, healed wounds, and love that grew stronger with each passing season. And somewhere, perhaps, another heart was learning that broken things could become beautiful again, that healing came in many forms, and that love's greatest miracles often arrive disguised as life's greatest challenges. The end. To all who read this tale, share it with someone who needs to believe in healing, in second chances, in love's power to transform. For in sharing stories of hope, we become part of the healing journey ourselves.